All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another edition of a Google Plus Hangout for Channels Beam. Today, we're looking at the Not Too Young to Run bill that was, well, I can't really say was smuggled out, but then there has been a lot of controversy over it. It was alleged to have been smuggled out, but then the House of Representatives actually replied saying, no, it wasn't smuggled out, but then it was actually passed or it was considered under a different name. And that will be our focus today on the program. Now joining us to look at that, we have first Mariam Loshi joins us from Abuja. Thanks for coming on the program. Of
Thank you for having me.
course. And we also have Samson Itodo, who joins us from Abuja as well. Samson, good afternoon, and thanks for coming on the program.
Pleasure is mine.
Of course. We also have Mark Amaza. Mark, thank you for joining us as well, if you can hear me. All right, I think Mark can't hear us, but I'm sure he will sort all that out in the course of the program. But then, Mariam, let me start with you. Of course, Samson and Mark are gentlemen, so I think the ladies first rule should apply in this instance. So, what's the update? What's going on with the Not Too Young to Run bill? Why was there so much talk about it on the social cyberspace in the past week?
Well, all of us got news initially that, our bill wasn't being considered in the report. And so obviously, we weren't really happy about that. A lot of Nigerian youth were outraged. You can see some of that in the news, a lot of different reactions. And so there were different reports coming through. And the Not Too Young to Run team did not want a situation whereby we would not have our bill being considered, in the report. So that was what, got us into this situation. And we are hearing news now that it has been included, which is good. So still marching, we're planning a march on Tuesday, concerning everything around the bill and around the bill.
All right, very well. Samson, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think that, like Mariam said, news filtered in after the Senate, the Joint Committee on Constitutional Review retreat in Lagos, that first the issue of the removal of age limits for running for office wasn't even on the agenda at the Lagos retreat. And reaching out to speakers of the State House of Assembly who were participants at the Lagos retreat also confirmed that Not Too Young to Run was not on the agenda. And for the leadership of the movement being monitors of this process, we know the implication of not having a bill considered at a retreat of that nature. It clearly means that at the committee stage, the bill or the whole proposal was killed, and that's why it didn't feature in the Lagos agenda. And it was very, very critical and strategic for us to ask the National Assembly critical questions. And the first question the movement asked was, what is even the status of this bill? And the National Assembly was very responsive over the last 2 days to provide what we are on the bill. The Senate issued a statement yesterday in response to the movement that the bill was in the report that was laid on the 30th by the Deputy Senate President. And the Deputy Speaker also brought this up on the floor of the House on Thursday. And they have given assurances that the bill or the proposal is contained in the constitutional amendment. But you know that this bill will be voted upon next week, precisely on Tuesday and Wednesday. Both chambers will be voting on the constitutional amendment. And once they vote on amendments, it will be transmitted to the states. And then the states will bring back to the National Assembly, and then it goes to the president, because this is a constitutional amendment process. And that's why it's very, very critical that citizens are going to be marching to the National Assembly on Tuesday to further impress the need why our lawmakers should vote yes for the bill. And there are constitutional requirements if any amendment must pass when it's the Constitution. You must get 72 votes at the Senate and then 240 votes at the House. If you don't get these votes, no amendment will be passed in the Constitution. And that is why it's critical that We are going to be marching on Tuesday, 25th July, mobilizing citizens to the National Assembly to impress it on the need why the legislators should vote yes on this amendment.
All right, Samson, if you, in one breath, you said the House, they've given their assurances that they will actually look at this. Why then do you need to make the march?
Well, the match first. In fact, if there's one time that we need the match, it's actually now, because they are going to be voted, and it is important. They are elected representatives. We are coming to meet with them and tell them they need to vote yes for this this amendment. The match is not a protest, but mainly thank them for considering the bill and to have been responsive, because this is the kind of relationship, when you talk about a democracy, this is the kind of relationship that should exist between representatives of the people and the people. So there is nothing extraordinary about conducting a march and going to the National Assembly. It is part of a democratic process. It is an exercise and a fulfillment of our civic duty and responsibility that we march to the National Assembly and say, hey, this Constitution is our ground norm. It is the most important document that we have. In fact, the Nigeria that we celebrate and we are all part of is a creation of the Constitution. And so being a legal and a political document, it is critical that the preamble that says we the people is truly we the people. Therefore, our desires and our interests need to be captured in the Constitution. So I would encourage as millions and millions of Nigerians who can make it for the march to go interface with the legislators. They should do that.
All right, very well. I think Mark joins us now. Mark, good afternoon, and thanks for joining us. Hello, Mark, can you hear me? All right, I think Mark still can't hear me, but then Mimi, let me just come back to you now. Looking at, I mean, this bill has been pushed for, and some people are actually saying that it is very important ahead of the 2019 elections. How important is it, if you agree it is indeed important, ahead of the elections coming up in 2019?
So like Samson mentioned, this bill is a, monumental movement for our democracy as a nation. Young people have to be involved in the political process. So youth need to participate, and there are different ways to participate. People come out to vote, people come out to campaign for people they believe in and support parties that, have similar ideologies to them. And so when you say this bill is going to pass before 2019 and it will be effective during the 2019 elections, first of all, that's going to be a motivation for Nigerian youth to say, this bill means, my representatives, my leaders believe that I have a say in what happens in this country. It encourages people because one of the issues we have with people with, elections is that indifference. They don't bother to vote. And when you give young people like this a bill, it makes them feel like they have a voice. They're included in what happens in the political process of the country. Now, we're seeing around the world, a 39-year-old got elected in France. That's such a huge move in France. And Nigerians are clamoring for something similar. So if on all levels of government, young people are allowed to participate, and often people forget about the second part of the Not Too Young to Run bill, which talks about independent candidacy, which now takes out, having to go through the party politics to get a ticket for a certain position. It's going to allow a lot more participation. It's going to allow a lot more people to feel involved. And I think it's going to improve the democratic process in our country.
All right, so you talked about Nigeria wanting a similar situation to what happened in France, where a 39-year-old actually got elected as president. But the number of young people that have also been elected into office in Nigeria, say maybe in terms of I mean, we haven't had a president that young, but at least we've had governors. Back in the day, Saminu Turaki was around that age when he got elected into office. How would you say those young people, I mean, Oji Uzakalu was all pretty young, and a couple of them, how would you say these young people have actually performed while in office?
Okay, so sometimes I get concerned when people try to compare, you know, people try to group young people as if we're all the same. The performance of certain people who have been in office, because I've heard a lot of different comparisons coming in. People say, okay, so this young person did this, therefore maybe they did something negative, therefore young people should not do it. And I think that's an unfair comparison. When it comes down to it, if this bill is passed and young people are allowed to participate and run for elective office, they have the chance to prove themselves. Each and every individual has the chance to prove himself, and not just as a young person, but even for older person. The important things are the credibility, and also, if that person is able to communicate their plans for whichever office they want to take. And if they get voted in, I think that they should be allowed to have a clear, foundation, a clear, expectancy, so that they're not being constantly compared to past people who have won within certain age groups. If this happens, more young people will come out, and it will be a chance for each and every person to individually, prove themselves. Like I've always said, it's not necessarily your age that qualifies you, and also it's not your age that should disqualify you. It's up to your caliber. That is what should qualify you.
All right. Is there any provision for maybe gender equality in the Not Too Young to Run bill?
No, there's no provision for gender equality, but I strongly believe that when you open up the space for young people much sooner, especially women, it begins to give them the opportunity. It begins to let them know that, for many women, I've worked on a gender program. For many young women, they want to, but they don't actually realize that they can, or that they should, or they don't feel encouraged. But when you find that at a young age, at 25, you have the opportunity to do something like this, you don't start to think about it later in your life. Even as a young woman, it's opening up a space. It's opening up how you think about the way the country works and the way politics works. And so it gives you an opportunity to think, okay, maybe I can begin to get involved at an earlier age. And I think that's what the Not Too Young to Run bill serves for women as well.
All right, very well. I'll come back to you in just a minute. But then, Samson, let me just get to hear from you. Both of you have actually talked about, the young people getting involved, in politics, in decision making. So, what's the connection, in terms of now exclusion from policy making and even development issues? How do you connect this to how to make progress?
I think it was former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan that said that any country that sidelines its youth severes its lifeline. You can't talk about development, you can't talk about governance without inclusion. And democracy as a concept loses its vitality if you don't include every aspect of your society. That have moved from third worlds to first worlds, or have moved from being underdeveloped, are nations that harnessed the potentials of their youth and converted them to assets. What we have today in our country is a country that continues to recognize its youth as potentials and not as assets. We've not moved from potentials to assets. And there's no way we can develop. Check it. If you look at the Asian tigers in the 1970s, what did they do? They invested so much in their youthful population because that's your most productive workforce. If you look at America today, if you look at different parts of the world, the whole world and globally have attention on young people. And when you hear youth bulge, the African Union is focusing on harnessing the demographic dividend in young people through investment in youth. So if you have a population who are young people, they will determine your development trajectory over the next 50 years. I am one person who confidently believes that where Nigeria will go in the next 50 years will be determined by the energy, the skill, their population, if converted. There's investment in your population, it will yield. So there's a connection. Look at different sectors of our national life. Are you talking about the agricultural sector? Who are the farmers in the agricultural sector? Who are those introducing new innovative ideas to spur agricultural growth? Do you want to talk about the economy? Let's look at the informal sector. Who are those who run the informal sector? A lot of them are young people. Do you want to talk about technology? There's a lot of young people who run tech companies today who are doing excellently well. I have not seen, there's no literature anywhere across the world or even Nigeria within our own climate that has debunked the fact that young people are not energetic, young people are not innovative, young people are not resilient. No literature debunks this. Therefore, if there is a recognition that we need the potentials and this energy of young people to transform our developmental state, then it is just apt and rational to invest in them and give them a space within the political process. The point must also be made that when you talk about political participation, it's just one aspect of the whole discussion around inequality or exclusion. And what the campaign seeks to do is to look at this particular aspect and resolve this issue. You're going to have young people who will get into office and they'll participate in decision making. Look at our budget process today. As defective as it is, I tell you that if you have very competent young people, if you have young people who are patriotic, because a lot of them do exist, and young people who have the requisite competency for holding, they will transform the budget process. They will transform our economy. They will transform even our lawmaking process, because the business of policy making and leadership is Herculean. It requires energy. And, our President Buhari, did say something when he came back from his previous trip before he traveled. He talked about, as an elderly person, the combination of his wisdom of being a younger person to him with his energy and resilience is what is needed to spur governance or spur economic growth and development. And Not Too Young to Run is not saying we want the elders to leave the political scene. No, actually, what Not Too Young to Run seeks to do is to promote intergenerational dialogue by bringing young people closer to our elderly, our leaders who have more wisdom and have more experience. So we build a solid foundation for civic engagement in the future. And so you can't talk about development if you don't have young people. So who are you developing for? Do you have the innovation? Do you have the skill? Do you have the intellect that young people have that we need to solve our current problems and our current realities? You don't use outdated ideas to solve the emerging problems of our society. And the trends have actually shown. El-Rufai understands it. That's why he's got lots of young people in his cabinet. Governor Willie Obiano of Anambra understands this. That's why he has young people in his government. If you go to Lagos, despite these challenges, look at what's happening in the whole enterprise development sector, and the fact that you've got young people who are the drivers because they are energetic, they are resilient, they are innovative, and you can't develop. And that point needs to be made, that you can't develop if you exclude the largest bulk of your population, particularly young people.
All right, very well. I guess we'll have to leave the conversation here, at least till after the March. But just before we go, Mariam, what would you like to say in wrapping up?
Okay, I'd like to thank the lawmakers for, taking into consideration the Not Too Young to Run bill. It's a huge role that they've played in this, and we keep saying they'll go down in history for it if this passes on. And I would also like to call on all Nigerian youth to join us in Abuja at Unity Fountain at 8 a.m., where we'll be walking down to the National Assembly. Samson?
Yeah. Are we still on?
I'm not sure. I think his internet probably.
Okay, sorry.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, I'm still here. Mariam, thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you.
Of course. Samson, thank you as well for joining us.
Always a pleasure, and thanks for promoting this campaign using your platform. We really appreciate.
It's not a problem. But then that's where we wrap it up on this hangout for Channels Beam. Again, it is a Channels Beam production, and Victor Matthias.